So again, welcome everyone to the basically our webinar today. Our webinar today is a follow-up on a previous essentially webinar that we've had in regards to the CASL legislation. So for all of us Canadians, as you probably know by now, CASL legislation was essentially it came in place a couple months ago, and in result of that, a lot of rules came in place in how we can communicate with our clients, with our leads, prospects, and and really anyone within Canada. The communication essentially the channels that fall under the CASL legislation could be from social media to email, push broadcast, SMS, really any type of digital communication. Now, for more details on essentially what CASL legislation is, I recommend watching our previous webinar, which I go into the details of, the CASL legislation and how it will affect you. On this webinar today, the essentially objective is for us to go over essentially the features that Perfect Mind has developed to be able to help you with essentially managing the consents and your communication through Perfect Mind with your clients and contacts. So, as mentioned last time on the last webinar, we've basically worked hard in developing some features that essentially can help you with managing consents. Starting off with the first feature that we developed, which is already essentially been utilized by now by most of you. It was some automated emails that we scheduled to go out on different periods of time to be able to get what we call express consent from your existing contacts, so you can freely communicate with your contacts moving forward. That's something that has already been done, but what we have done today and recently is to we released a couple of features starting with the report to be able to help you really understand who essentially has provided consent, and also what type of consent you have with the different contacts in your database. So let's first go through the report. If you can visit the report by going to obviously the report section, under the marketing folder, you would see a new report called consent emails. Now, on this report, you see multiple columns of information. The first column, you would see the contact full name, so the student, the lead, former student that's associated to the email. You would see the email account here. You would see the start date, so this is essentially when the consent was provided. You would see the end date, which I'll explain in a few moments, so what that means. The reason of the consent, so how was the consent received, and also if it's an express consent or if it's not. So as, again, most of you guys know, we have two different types of consent when it comes to the CASL legislation. We have the implied consent and we have the express consent. The implied consent means that, for a variety of different categories, you might essentially, be able to be consented to communicate with your contacts. What are these categories? For example, if you're doing business with essentially someone, so if someone's your member and actively paying you and attending classes and whatnot, you're able to communicate with them as long as they're, in business with you. In addition to that, other types of consent could be for a new inquiry or a new lead. When you receive a new lead, you have essentially 6 months' time to be able to communicate with them. And during this time, you have essentially the 6-month time is considered as implied consent. Other types could be if someone has purchased a product for you, you again have a duration of time to be able to consent with them and communicate with them. And lastly, if you have a former member or a customer, you actually have up to 2 years to be able to communicate with the customer. So what we do actually for every, the system actually works automatically, goes through your contacts on a daily basis and categorizes them based on, these implied reasons. And based on the reason that we find, we actually populate the field here versus reason. So for example, you might, see reasons like inquiry or purchase. So inquiry is a lead, purchase is because this contact had basically purchased a product to essentially this business that I'm essentially this database that I'm showing you guys today. So what the end date is actually directly connected to implied consent as well. For those consents, and all implied consents have an end date. So the system will automatically also generate the end date for you. So you always know from what date onwards you're not able to communicate with that email anymore. So in the case of essentially, inquiry, as I mentioned, it's essentially 6 months duration. So as you see, 6 months after the consent was provided, the consent will end and will essentially come off this list. And, and as you see for purchase, we have the 2-year duration, 24 months that you can communicate with the contact. And, basically, as you see, the date has been populated 2 years after the date that the consent was provided. So this is the first type of consent, which is implied consent. So, different rules fall under it, and it's very likely actually that the rules over time change as well. I'm sure people will complain, or or basically businesses will request more options, and over time, things might change. Now, the second type of consent, which is essentially the best type of consent, is express consent. So express consent has no end date, and as you see, the actual consents that are marked as true under the column express, essentially the end date for those consents are left empty because there is no end date. So what an express consent means is that your student, your lead, your former student, that specific contact has expressed consent to you to receive emails or communication from you. Now, that consent that they've essentially expressed could have been provided either digitally through, an email or kind of a sign-up form. It could have been provided verbally. So maybe, you were having the discussion with the person and, they've agreed verbally that you are able to communicate with them. And lastly, it could be essentially provided to you in a written format. So all of these fall under the category of consent or express consent. Now, I do highly recommend reading more about getting express consent because there are certain rules and regulations you have to follow, certain things you have to say, and you also have to document it in a certain way in order to avoid any issues down the line. So there are some recommendations what to say, what information you must include in the documentation that you're getting the consent, and what information you should keep track of in case that there is a complaint filed against you in future years, that you're able to actually display that proof to be able to essentially protect yourself. So this is the first part, which is report. So it's essentially information for you to know essentially where everyone stands. Now, do note that in some cases you might have one email associated to multiple people, especially in cases of family. So that's also something that you should take consideration as well. So this is essentially the first section. Now, as I mentioned, basically in regards to express consent that could be provided either verbally or in a written format, that requires you to be able to manually mark a certain contact that they've actually provided that consent. So to be able to actually do that, we've created a new function. It's essentially a button under the contact section. You're able to select one or multiple contacts that you would like to mark and express consent for. So again, they verbally provided that consent, or they just essentially written you that you're able to get that or communicate with them. And you can press the button consent emails. So you will see a pop-up like this. It's explaining, what you are doing because, with not having the consent and taking this action is pretty risky. So it is explaining to you what action you're taking, which is please note that you should not manually consent email addresses unless you have the consent of the email owners. Business owners in Canada are required to be compliant with the Canada's anti-spam legislation. If you want to learn more about the Canada or the CASL legislation, you can just essentially click on this link, and that takes you to the related page. So this is one way that you're able to add people into an express consent, and as I press essentially accept, that those emails on that report are now marked as express consent. All right, so again, the first method is to manually mark people as express consent. Now, implied consent, as I mentioned, happens automatically based on certain rules and regulations, so you don't have to do really anything about that as long as you keep your data accurate from, entering the leads in the correct time, making sure it became lead date if you're putting the information afterwards. All that information, essentially, if it's populated correctly, you should be fine and you should not encounter any issues. Now, one thing that our goal is, and your goal should be the same as well, as you are getting more people on an implied consent, is to be able to convert them into express consent. Doing that will actually save you a lot of time and headache in future, because express consent puts them into the same position that they are today and or they were before, and that is that you can continue communicating with them until they say, don't communicate with me. So it just makes life a lot easier for you. So in addition of having options to manually mark someone as an express consent by communicating with them when they come to classes or when they come into take different seminars or workshops, in addition to that, what we've designed in our system is a series of automated emails to be sent to your implied consent group in a regular basis and trying to essentially get their express consent. So the two, we've actually scheduled two different types of automated emails in the system. Now, these automated emails contain information about consent, and also it has a button for the contact or the receiver of the email to be able to essentially click on it and accept the terms and conditions for CASL, and to have them moved automatically to the express list so you can communicate with them for the rest of time. We've created two different automated emails. The first automated emails is to target your inquiries, your leads. As of regulations, you have 6 months after someone inquires for your services, you can communicate with them for 6 months without any issues, and afterwards all the communication must stop. So our system will send an email every 70 days to all your leads to be able to get their express consent from them. Now, why we don't have it more than every 70 days and why we don't have it every week? Essentially, we didn't want to cause any people to unsubscribe from your list as getting too many emails. We believe this is this should be enough for you to be able to get express consent for those who are interested in your services and are qualified as qualified lead. But this information and this criteria is not written in stone. So if you would like to change this and have it every 100 days or every 20 days or 10 days, you are able to actually click on the email and update the criteria for it. But by default, you should see an automated email that targets all your inquiries every 70 days. In addition to that, we have one for all those contacts that you have some sort of business relationship with. So business relationships, meaning that someone has purchased a membership from you or purchased a product for you, that gives you either to communicate with them up to 2 years after the purchase or during the duration that they're actively paying you. So those are still the people that we want to move to your express consent. So these are your students or your members. So for these types of contacts, we have set up the rule to communicate with them every 7 months. Once again, like the previous email, you're able to update this. So on any of these emails, if you agree or disagree or want to update the schedule type of them, you're able to click on the email, scroll to the bottom of the page, and update the auto setting option. So if I want this email to go out every month, I'll be able to say repeat monthly and reduce the number of 7 to 1. And now this sends this email every month. But again, our settings have been put in place considering that, you don't want to over spam your contacts either. Too many emails will obviously cause them to unsubscribe from your list. Now, another thing you could do, which is utilizing the existing content that we have on these emails. If you want to target a certain individual and have them to provide the consent, you're able to actually copy the code from this section and create a new email and send it to that individual. So I am able to essentially copy the email. When essentially you want to send an email, make sure on the target you are choosing opt-in. I can paste the content, and now I can target any individual client or any individual list to be able to receive the consent for. The last function that we've introduced as part of the CASL legislation update for PerfectMind, we improved the emailing system in the background. So all your emails that you send to all your contacts, any automated email that you already have set up in the system, maybe even if you have workflow emails created in the system, all those moving forward, if you opt in, and I'll explain why I mentioned if you opt in. When you send an email to, let's say you want to send a marketing email to all your contacts, the system will actually consider the consent level of all your contacts. So if I'm sending an email to 1,000 contacts and I only have consent from 500 people, only the 500 that I have consent from will receive the email. This will protect you essentially from any issues that, any spamming issues that could cause you issues in future. Now, I mentioned earlier that basically these features will be those of you who do opt in to this feature. By default, we have not activated all these features, and we will not activate all these features for every database, because we've had clients and we've seen people who want to manage the consent level themselves. Actually, PerfectMind really is the only product out there right now that, especially in the health and wellness industry and sector, that offers features to be able to protect you from, the CASL legislation. So if you wish to essentially get these features and have the email system to work in the background and choose who the email should go based on their consent level, what you're able to do, you're able to email us either support@perfectmind.com, or you can email me directly at nima@perfectmind.com, so we can activate your database to take advantage of these features. For those of you who don't want essentially for these features to take effect, then you don't have to communicate with us, and your functions and features will remain exactly the same as it is today, and you're able to communicate with your contacts based on your own rules and regulations. Some people would like to take the risk or believe that the CASL legislation doesn't apply to them. That is something that you could, as a business owner, decide and take the path that you are more comfortable with. Now, for those of you who are not fully aware what is CASL legislation and how it affects you, again, I recommend reading about it. There is a lot of documentation. There is essentially a website dedicated to this, which has been launched by the Government of Canada. So I do recommend taking a look, reading all the details about this, as this will, affect, how businesses are run in Canada and how we are communicating to our contacts. It's something that's going to be with us for a while, so it's very important for you as a business owner in Canada to really know about it. Overall, this CASL legislation falls under anyone that is communicating from a computer in Canada or to a computer in Canada. So it effectively affects most of us. So do read about it and see if you want to take advantage of these features that PerfectMind has created to support you. And if you do, I am actually sharing my contact or the email addresses on the chat box, support@perfectmind.com or nima@perfectmind.com. If you can email these addresses, the subject line CASL, and mentioning that you opted for these features so we can activate it for you in the background. Now, one thing that based on my studies of CASL legislation I've learned is that for first essentially 2 years up until 2017 actually, the government is a little bit more lenient because that's the public and your contacts are not able to directly sue the business. So they're a little bit more lenient as long as you're trying to follow the rules and regulation. They essentially might probably will not essentially go after that business or find them. But I do recommend reading more about it. This is kind of a gray area. It's not so black and white. So it's very important for you guys to really get yourself, informed and up to date with all the rules and regulations and choose what you believe works best for your business. At this point, we can go into questions. I didn't want to take too much of everyone's time in the middle of the week. Just wanted to bring these features to everyone's attention. We can go to questions. The first question here is this feature available on the desktop version? Most of these features are developed for the browser version. Obviously, for functions like the report, you are able to also access it to the browser version, in the smart client version as well. In addition, the emailing system, that is a platform change, so it doesn't matter if you access it through desktop or browser. When you do send emails, and if this feature is activated for you, you will be protected, and the emails will not go out to everyone. Dustin has asked, can you review how we get express consent from students again? Yes, Dustin. So technically, there are 3 ways you are able to actually get express consent. So one is in a written format, so someone actually writing you, filling up a form essentially and signing it at the end that they are able to, or they are providing you consent. So you can go into the government website. I believe they even have sample documents for that. You can print that out. And as students enter your classes, maybe you are able to have them sign and agree, to that legislation. Number 2 is by verbally. So again, there are the examples on the CASL website, but there are certain questions that you have to ask, and verbally a student or contact is able to provide you consent. And lastly, is through automated email, or through emails overall. We have emails created in the system that goes out to all your students every 7 months to be able to get consent from them. Now, if you want, you are able to grab the copy of this, the content, and send it to all your students. And, all your students will get it right away. And they're able to click on the button here. Let me just show you the button. The button here to be able to provide you the consent needed. So these are really the 3 methods to do it. We've already sent some emails to your contacts as of our last webinar. This was done in, June, July. So it's possible that the percentage of your contacts have already provided you the consent. Overall, it's very likely that not 100% of your contacts have provided you consent. A lot of people lose emails or goes to the junk box, or they don't really pay attention to the emails as much, so they might have missed it. Or some people just don't want to get communication from you or don't want to get your emails. So it could be really a variety of reasons, but the tools are there for you to be able to actually go after the consents. Jeff has asked if there are already these 2 emails set in our email list. Doesn't that mean it's already active? That is, but I still recommend, Jeff, just because I don't have all the information in regards to your database in front of me, I do recommend sending me the email for CASL so we can double check and make sure everything is active. There are certain workflows also in the background that we need to make sure it's active in addition to the emails. That what it does as people making purchases or buying memberships, it puts them into the right, CASL list or reason list. So, if you send us an email or the support team an email, we can make sure that that's connected for you and everything is working fine. All right, that was the last of the questions. We'll give a couple more minutes if there are any more questions that might come up. This session is, by the way, recorded. Will be shared with everyone in about a week. So you are able to revisit basically what was discussed today, so you can learn more about the CASL features within PerfectMind. Antoine has asked if there is a way that a field can be added to someone's profile. So I believe you mean the field for the level of consent. In the future, possibly. Not right at this moment. This is not something that can be done, but in future, it's possible that will be done. As like any other feature within PerfectMind, we continue to improve it and take it to the next level. But right now, it's based on just because of the complexity of multiple email accounts. But because one thing is, it's not just based on contacts, a certain person cannot provide you just consent. It's a certain email that can provide the consent. That's essentially how it works. So, if you have multiple email fields or on a contact, so it technically has to be the consent per email account. So there is a little bit more architectural complication with that, which we want to obviously make it easy as possible. So in future, we are revisiting it and see how we can improve it furthermore. But right now, at this moment, because again, multiple email fields and things like that, it's not something we can deliver. Yes, right now, Antoine has, if currently the only way to know is through the report. Currently, the only method to know is reports. We are planning to enhance our email fields, and when that gets done, we'll be moving the consent levels to those email fields as well. All right, so I believe we've answered all the questions. Again, if you have any questions about this matter, please feel free to contact myself for our team at support. As just a reminder, our support team can be reached through telephone, through email, and also through emails and chat. And they are available 24 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and also on Saturdays we're available at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time up until 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Once again, I thank you on behalf of ChampionsWay and PerfectMind, and thank you for attending this webinar. And hopefully we'll see you guys next time. Have a good day.